Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for this video, I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I managed to finish in October, of course, during the Stephen King Readathon. And before I get into that, I just want to thank everybody who did sign up and participate in the Stephen King Readathon. I just want to thank you guys so much. I had a blast, and me and Stacy had a blast setting it up, and then when it all came to fruition, everyone seemed to enjoy it, the people who participated, and it really couldn't have gone better. I had such a fun time doing it, and yeah, thank you guys so much for making it an awesome experience. I'm filming this video on October 29th, so we don't have a winner quite yet, but when this video goes up, we will know who the winner is, so congratulations to whoever wins. Currently, right now, Team Annie is winning, and they've really just been winning this whole time, but hopefully Team Jack, the team that I'm on, can prevail and read a bunch of books and hopefully overtake Team Annie and Team Pennywise. So we'll see. I don't know, but either way, it's just been a lot of fun, and it just gives, an excuse for more people to read Stephen King. I read a ton of Stephen King this month, and I know a lot of people, like there are 19 prompts, and there were some people who read 19 Stephen King books. That's insane. But, whew, okay, and just again, thank you guys so much for participating and making it an awesome experience. And without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. And since there are 19 books that I have to talk about here, I'm not going to go into too much detail about all of them. I'm just going to say just how I enjoyed it, or if I didn't enjoy it, just general information. You guys get the gist of it. Actually, the current book that I'm reading right now, since I'm reading this on October 29th, I haven't quite finished it yet, but it's Evil Under the Sun by Agatha Christie, and I'm basically done. I got like an hour left of it. It's pretty good. It's another, Hercule Poirot book. It's not one of my favorites. I'm kind of bored with it a little bit, but it's decent. It's Agatha Christie. Like, it's nothing, it's not blowing my mind or anything, but it's decent. It's my 19th prompt, or it's my 19th book, I should say, and I'm going to finish that, and I would have finished 19 books, so there's that. I also reread The Bands of Mourning by Brandon Sanderson. This is the third book in the Mistborn Era 2 quartet, and I'm reading this because the fourth and final book in the quartet comes out in November, which is The Lost Metal. And I'm super excited for that. I've been waiting for years. The Bands of Mourning, even though it is great, it's probably my least favorite. Not because it's necessarily worse than the previous two. It's just I like the other two ones better. But this one is still very good. I gave it 4 stars. Can't wait to read the sequel and the final book in the quartet in November. I also read The Exorcist House by Nick Roberts. And this is a self-published horror book. And I had a lot of fun with this book. It was not perfect. I had a couple problems with it, but overall, this book had a lot of twists and turns to it that I wasn't expecting, and overall, it was just a lot of fun. Definitely some spooky stuff in this, and yeah, it had a lot of cool stuff in it, and definitely if he writes more, or if he has written more, I'd like to read more of Nick Roberts' stuff. This one was a lot of fun. I gave it 4 stars. I also read The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager, and this was probably one of my biggest disappointments in the month of October. I've read 2 of his other books, Survive the Night, which was pretty good. The first half was excellent, and then the second half was meh. And then Home Before Dark, which was actually very good. I liked that one. This one I gave 2.5 stars. I did not like as much. The first half was very boring and very slow. I didn't really care about too many of the characters, and it felt kind of predictable. And the second half, even though stuff was happening, I could kind of see where it might be leaning to. And then the ending, I just wasn't a fan of. And this definitely was one of my biggest disappointments. Definitely my least favorite Riley Sager book so far. Can't say too much about it because, you know, it's a thriller, so I don't want to give too much away. But the ending just wasn't to my liking. So yeah, I gave this one 2.5 stars. Two other non-Stephen King books that I read during the month was Elder Race by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And this was actually read to me via Discord by Stacy. She owns this book and I do not. She read it to me. We try to read to each other every now and then. And this one was okay. I've read a few other Adrian Tchaikovsky books that I loved much more. Children of Time, Children of Ruin, and more recently Cage of Souls. Very good. Elder Race, it's just one of those weird novellas where it feels out of place. Like, it really should have either been condensed into a short story or lengthened into a novel, like a short novel. But the length it was didn't really feel justified. Like, it felt too long and too short at the same time, which is really weird for novellas. If you're going to write a novella, you got to make sure that it's, like, properly lengthed. Stephen King and George R.R. Martin are usually very good at this, but some authors are not. But yeah, Elder Race was fine. I gave it 3 stars. Not anything I'd ever want to reread again. So yeah, it was fine. I gave it 3 stars. And the other non-Stephen King book I read was Playing Nice, which was a thriller that came highly recommended to me from Stacy. She really liked it, especially the second half. I really liked it too, but there was something at the very end that just really grinded my gears of like a character decision that I'm just like, why would you just not do this? If you did that, everything would have worked out, but you had to do that. And most of the book was very good because it's about essentially baby swapping. You meet these two parents and then they quickly realize that this other parent has their kid and they have their kid. Their babies, when they were born, they were very premature and had a lot of health issues, but they were actually swapped, so they had each other's babies. And then there's a whole like legal argument about like what they're supposed to do, and there's a lot of backstabbing and manipulation. I liked all that stuff and like the mounting dread of it, but then towards the end there was some weird stuff that I didn't like. Overall, it was very entertaining though. I give it 4 stars. And now we get to the mountain of Stephen King books that I managed to read in the month of October. I'm going to talk about them in no real order, just however I managed to put them in order right there. But the first one that I'm going to talk about is probably one of my least favorites of the month. One of the biggest disappointments was Gwendy's Final Task, which I knew going in that I probably wasn't going to like it, but I was hoping it would be a little better than the second book, which was Gwendy's Magic Feather. I really did not like that. I gave it 2 stars. And Gwendy's Final Task, it was like maybe a tad bit better because it actually had like stuff happening in the story. But overall, I really didn't enjoy it. I enjoyed the Dark Tower elements that were kind of introduced. But at the same time, the books 2 and 3, like the sequels to Gwendy's Button Box, Gwendy's Button Box was so good. It should have been a standalone. And it just goes to show you that sometimes when you write sequels to really good stories, you probably shouldn't have. And that was a clear case. I'll probably reread Gwendy's Button Box and just try to forget about Magic Feather and Final Task. But at the same time, it kind of ruins the magic that Button Box had. So, a bit of a downer. And it was actually the first book I read in October. So, a little bit of a downer. And then the rest of Stephen King's stuff that I read in October, I own physically. I did a mix of immersion/audio depending on what I was doing, but I think I have 12 more to talk about. And the first one I have here is The Dark Half. And oh, by the way, all of these are rereads for me, besides Gwendy's Final Task, which I read for the first time. The Dark Half, a reread for me. I actually liked it slightly less this time. The first time I remember it being very good. I think I gave it 4.5 stars. Second time around, knowing what I know, it definitely felt more repetitive than how I remembered. It's not that chunky, but it's almost 500 pages, and it probably could have been shortened down to maybe 400 pages or so. It definitely gets a little repetitive after you figure out what's going on. I do really like the premise, and I do really love the ending, But overall, a little bit repetitive, but it's still very fun. It's still a very fun book. I think I would lean more towards 4 stars. Dark Half is definitely very good, but definitely not one of my like all-time favorite Stephen King books. And then we have On Writing, which I listened to, and Stephen King is normally not a very good audio narrator, but this is his memoir slash writing book. So him narrating this just makes sense, and it was actually a lot of fun. And again, a reread for me. I don't have to keep saying that, but yeah, this time around, it was good. I really enjoy his memoir part of the book, which I think is about the first half. When he gets to the writing stuff, like, it's fine. And I really did enjoy the first time I read it when I was trying to write short stories, back when I did that. But the second time, I was just kind of like, had it on in the background, didn't pay too much attention to the actual writing advice section, even though some of it was interesting. It's just not relevant to me that much. But I do really love the memoir aspect of this book. So for that, it does get 4 stars. I really do enjoy this one. Next up, I have Dolores Claiborne. Now, the first time I read this, I read it physically, and it was after reading like a bunch of like really classic and scary Stephen King books. So when this first started, I don't know, like the first 100 pages or so, I really wasn't that into it, but my dad, who was like a big time Stephen King fan, was just like, keep going, it'll get better. And it definitely did. Then the second time around, I actually listened to this on audio, which is a much better experience in my mind, because whoever does the audio narration of this is just, she just did such a good job with Dolores Claiborne. She just nailed it, and it's actually a better audio experience, I think, than just physically. Audio narrator knocked it out of the park. Dolores Claiborne might be a top 10 Stephen King book for me now. It definitely top 20, top 15, but it might just shoot up into my top 10. I had such a good time listening to this, and I'm very happy that my girlfriend Stacy, who is not really a Stephen King fan, she really loved this too and also gave it 5 stars, so yay. But yeah, Dolores Claiborne, one of the best characters and protagonists that Stephen King has ever written. And this book is just awesome. I gave it 5 stars, one of his best. And I will also do a dedicated book review at some point because it was the Patreon pick for October. So look forward to that. Next book I have might be a little controversial because I think it's one of his most overrated books. And I'm not talking about it. I'm not talking about The Stand. I'm not talking about 11/22/63, which are all chunkers. This one's actually a very short book, but I still think it's overrated. And that would be Pet Sematary. Calm down. It's not a bad book. I think it's good. It's even pretty good. I just don't think it's among his best. And I probably will do sort of like a semi-ranty review for Pet Sematary, just because I do have some significant problems with this book. Like, and I'm not trying to be narcissistic or whatever, but if I wrote this book, I would have made significant changes to it. I would have taken out some stuff, and there's just some stuff that Stephen King does in this book that I just don't like, and I can't talk about it because it spoils the crap out of it, but I will talk about it in my ranty review for it, so look forward to that sometime next month, or this month, depending on when this comes out. But yeah, Pet Sematary, I'd probably give it 3.5 stars. I know a lot of people love it, but for me, I have problems with it. And now we get to my all-time favorite Stephen King book that I'm so glad a lot of people read and really enjoyed this month. And it was the dreaded 19th prompt. You get 50 points for reading it, so a lot of people have been reading it. And that would, of course, be The Dead Zone, my all-time favorite Stephen King book. I had actually only read this once, and it was a long time ago, but it's one of those books that just really stayed with me, and I remembered pretty much almost all of it, which I have really bad book amnesia, and for a book to have that good of a lasting impression on me is tremendous. In The Dead Zone, after my reread, I still give it 5 stars. It's still my all-time favorite Stephen King book. I love it. I even loved the audiobook narrated by James Franco. I think he actually did a very good job. And yeah, this continues to be my all-time favorite Stephen King book, and I'm so glad that some people, not everybody, some people had some problems with it, but a lot of people are really enjoying The Dead Zone, or, you know, they gave it like 4, 4.5, even 5 stars. So yeah, I'm glad people are enjoying it. I definitely did. My all-time favorite Stephen King book, The Dead Zone. And another King book is Cujo. Very underrated. Like, on Goodreads, it has sort of a lower rating, and I don't normally see people putting it, like, very high on their overall ranking list. A lot of people don't love the first half of this book because they really just want to see Cujo attack people. And you don't really get that until more like halfway through the book. First half of the book is sort of just introducing all of the characters in Castle Rock that the story pertains to. And I can get why it would be boring for some people, but I just love the way that Stephen King writes the characters in this book. And it's just slowly setting up the mounting dread and just, you know it's coming. You know, the premise of like the mom and the son being locked in a car and they're being attacked by Cujo. The way he sets it up, I think, it is a bunch of like coincidences happening all at once, but I just think it's brilliantly done and very scary. Like, just putting yourself in this situation is very creepy and terrifying. So yeah, Cujo is definitely one of my favorites. I wouldn't put it in my top 10, probably in my top 20, maybe. But yeah, it's very good, definitely awesome. Cujo, I think, would get like 4.5 stars from me. Another King book that I was definitely looking forward to rereading was Finders Keepers. And this is the second book in the Mr. Mercedes, Bill Hodges trilogy. The first book, Mr. Mercedes, is pretty good. It's like 3.5 stars. It's got a good plot, but the characters aren't always there for me. Like, they're fine. But with this book, you don't really get that much of Bill Hodges and the other people from the first book. It's like the first 150 pages, they're not even in it. Like, he just introduces the premise and the plot, and it's so riveting. I love this book. And this should have been a standalone. Like, if this was a standalone and Bill Hodges and company just wasn't in this book, it'd probably be 5 stars. But they're in it, and they've got some... I don't really like them that much. So it drops it down to 4.5 stars, but it's still super compelling. Like, I love this book. And probably I can just get away with reading this book and just forgetting about Mr. Mercedes and fuck End of Watch. I thought about doing it for the readathon, but I was like, I don't want to read that bad a King book. I know some people like it, but for me, I just like Finders Keepers. It's so good. 4.5 stars. Speaking of bad books that I probably shouldn't have read for the readathon, because it did kind of put me in a King slump. I read like the first 80 pages of this book, and I was like, you know what? I need a break from King. I need to read something else. But I did go back to it and finish it, and that would be Cell. Now, I read this a long time ago, and a few of my friends who aren't like great Stephen King fans, they had read like maybe 1 or 2 of his books. They read this, and they're like, oh yeah, I read that, you know, right when it came out, and I thought it was good. So I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. It didn't have a movie at the time. I didn't really know what the story was, and I really didn't like it. I didn't like it at the time, and then I reread it now, and I still don't really like it that much. Like, the premise, like the start of this book is actually cool. Like, it's the apocalypse that's set about when people are on their phone and people go nuts. So it's a very cool premise, especially at the time when cell phones were on the rise. By today's standards, it might be a little dated, but still, it starts out well enough. But then you get into it, the prose isn't really good. Not that Stephen King is well known for prose, but even the prose isn't that good. The dialogue isn't very good. The characters are not very compelling. Like, the action stuff in here is kind of cool, and like the thrills. But overall, I really didn't connect to any of the characters. And of course, King is a character-driven writer. And for most of this book, I just found it not very compelling and boring at times. Not a terrible book, but I'd give it like 2.5 stars. Just not one of my favorites. One of the best Stephen King experiences during this readathon was my reread of Revival. Now, for this book, it's one of those books where I had remembered the very beginning and, of course, the very ending. Because the ending is just infamous King just being super nihilistic and dark. And, of course, that's a very unforgettable ending. But the middle chunk of this book, I kind of remembered a little bit, but a lot of it was very foggy. So catching up with this and rereading it was very fun, and it actually quickly rose up on my list. It's probably going to be a top 10, if not, top 15 Stephen King book. Like, it quickly rose up on my list. Like, not only is the ending good, but just overall, the whole book is just full of dread and just very, it's so good. And also, there's a lot of musical stuff in it, which, that's a plus for me. So yeah, Revival is definitely awesome. Definitely one of the best Stephen King books I've read. And of course, I gave it 5 stars. I also reread one of his newer books that came out last year in 2021, and that would be Later. Now, I think initially when I reviewed this book, it might have just been recency bias, but I gave it 5 stars. This time around, I think I'm a little bit more down on it. I gave it 4.5 stars. It's still really cool, and the main character is one of the better, like, newer Stephen King protagonists. But there is some stuff towards the end and just stuff overall that I'm not the biggest fan of. It's definitely not perfect. So I think I'm retracting my 5 stars and giving it more of a 4.5 star. It's still really good and definitely one of his better, like, newer books that he's put out. But I think stuff, like Revival is better now. So even though I still really love it, I'm retracting my 5 stars from my earlier review and giving it 4.5 stars. Then I believe the last 2 books I have to talk about are 2 Dark Tower books, and that would of course be Book 6, Song of Susanna, and Book 7, The Dark Tower. Chunky, chunky, chunky. And Book 6 has always been one of the most underrated Dark Tower books in my mind. I know a lot of people just straight up hate this book, or they really dislike it, or it's their least favorite in the series, which I don't really understand because it's so awesome and it's hard to talk about without spoiling it, but there's just so much weirdness when it comes to this book. And that's what the Dark Tower is known for, is being just weird, right? Like, you read Book 2, so much weird stuff. Book 3, so much weird stuff, right? Like, it's definitely weird fantasy, and you can't get much weirder than what goes on in this book. Good God. So yeah, I gave this one like 4.5 stars. Definitely one of the top tier Dark Tower books for me. And then I also read, Book 7, the conclusion, The Dark Tower. And of course, I can't really talk about too much of this because it's the final book. But I actually liked it like slightly less than I did the first time. Even though the ending is still one of the best Stephen King endings ever. Like, just one of the best endings in general. Just overall, the book, it has a lot of boring parts. It's chunky. And there's a lot of stuff, stuff that Stephen King, like his decision making with the story and just where the story goes and the decisions he makes, I really can't get down with. And it's super hard to talk about. But there's a lot of great moments, but there's also a lot of anticlimactic and boring moments. So overall, I think the first time I rated this book, it was 4 stars, but I think I'm dropping it down to 3.5 stars. I'm a little down on this book, but still a lot of great moments, and of course a very terrific ending that makes it all worth it in my mind. But yeah, not one of my favorite Dark Tower books. I think that's all of the books I read during the readathon. If I missed any, editing Jake will pop in and tell me I'm a dumbass. All right, those should be all of the books that I managed to read in October during the Stephen King Readathon. If you took place in the Stephen King Readathon, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Me and Stacy had such a blast setting it up. And of course, big shout out to Stacy, because I really couldn't have done any of this without her. She did a lot of hard work, like helping me tally the votes and helping me set up the spreadsheet and just double checking, triple checking. So everyone go thank Stacy in the comments, because I really couldn't have done this without her. Now, what I want to know is, what was your favorite book that you read during the Stephen King Readathon? What was your least favorite? And then also, what was your favorite Stephen King book? And what was your least favorite Stephen King book? Let me know all that good stuff down in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and the Bookastormer Discord. And if you'd like to further support me, go check out my Patreon page and see what that's all about. I also have my Amazon wish list if anyone would like to buy me a book. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a fantastic doodly day.